Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about weak programmers and where do they work. So let's get into it. This is a bad question because now I need to express like where, at least from my perspective, I've found most of the people who aren't that versed in programming actually work. And this can of course be very subjective because that's the thing, right? You can only say what's sort of true here or things that you can base on your own experience because there's no objective way to actually measure accurately where most of them work. So I'll just give you my personal take. Okay, can we agree that this is just my personal take on matters, and hopefully that's going to be okay. So, weak programmers. So the first and foremost thing that I've found, at least when it comes to where people who have an issue with some form of some aspect of programming, what usually happens is that either they have very weak technical skills, like usually, because the thing is we need to define first and foremost what we actually mean about just being weak. Because if you can't code at all, odds are that you're going to be funneled into one direction. If you have really weak technical skills and you kind of sort of know what you're doing, you're going to go down one path. If you're just really scared, like you're a bit of an introvert and you have problems just communicating effectively with people, it's very likely that you're going to go down a third path. So for the people who almost don't know how to code, they know some basics and so forth, or rather they may have gone to an official education, but they never really got to that point where they can compete in a confident manner or like a semi-confident manner. What usually happens with them is that you find them in what I call peripheral occupations within programming. A concrete example of this is that I have a schoolmate, and he's not the only one, who went into consultancy work as an integrations expert. So basically what he does is that he works primarily with MuleSoft's product, the integration platform. This is an example of, and he is a full-fledged programmer. He went through the same education and like all of this stuff, right, that I did. So in theory, he should be able to work. It might be a personal choice as well. It might be that he really enjoys this and he doesn't really care so much about programming. But he could have done this without that level of investment on his part, because he invested quite a few years into becoming this. And then, of course, I have other classmates or ex-schoolmates who are contacting me today looking for an opportunity to do some internship or something like that. They went through the same education and now they've actually taken a a complete new semester, and they basically re-educated themselves into front-end developers, and they're still struggling to find a job. So that's one thing, like going into something that is, because basically what he does is dragging and dropping boxes all day long in order to make the different transformations happen in Mule. You can check out Mule if you want. It's a very nice platform in many ways, but this is the sort of thing that you might find yourself doing if you can't cut it as a full-fledged programmer. Other things that I've seen when if we go a little bit higher up, let's say for the sake of argument that you sort of know some code and you have people who are semi-good at coding, maybe you have a skill level that, at least what most of the professional programmers would say, is bootcamp level. You have that level of skill. Then I have friends and classmates who went into also usually consultancy work as what we call solution architects. Where most of the primary thing that you're doing is basically doing it depends a little bit on the type of solution architect that you are, but for them it's usually a matter of you're working towards some really big companies out there in the industry who need to either create a JavaScript widget of some sort that does something on a page, or they might be involved in creating an A/B test or something like that. They can also be involved in migrating workflows where you might have some hook somewhere that needs to trigger a webhook based on that someone sent an email to this address, and then you want something to work to kind of integrate between several systems, right? So that's one part of it. And then I also have friends and coworkers who work as they started working for the government. That's also an example where you might find people who are, and this is the thing, I don't want to say that these people are, just because you work for the government doesn't mean that you're a bad programmer. It doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that if you're a solution architect, you're a bad programmer. This is the thing, like this is such a subjective question, but the reason why I mention these things specifically is because the requirements in general for working in these areas is lower because they don't have the same craze around you being the best. Because if we just accept the idea that if you want to work at Google or Facebook or like the top end super companies in IT, that is the far top. I mean, there's probably companies that are even more strict in some manner, and so that makes it kind of weird to think about this in the way that this question has been posed. But it's I mean, it's still possible for you to work in these areas without being a bad coder, and vice versa. It's just that usually the screening process is easier. It is in general easier to just work at a consultancy than it is to get into a very like a semi-famous startup or a product company of some repute, because they usually have a different mindset around the screening process and the people that they get into that company. I mean, there are other companies that still have this very rigorous, strict process, but in general it is easier. So if we then go all the way up to saying that, okay, you have some skills, you can kind of code and so forth, but maybe you have weak social skills, or you're completely self-taught and you don't really know like the academic aspects of programming, and you have a problem coming through interview questions and stuff like that. It's very often that I see that these programmers usually work in small consultancies or agencies or design firms, things of this nature, where the focus of their projects is usually more oriented around front end or visual things, or creating fairly simple systems that are often on a very sharp deadline. Like the projects may be just a few months long, and you need to just churn out something that might be extremely graphically extraordinary, right? But we're not talking about, one of the car industry's ordering systems, or like some flight management system, or something that is extremely complicated and very, very costly to maintain and produce, right? So that's in general where I find the people that some would call like weaker programmers, or people who aren't like, they don't fill that super subjective, well, you're a rock star super programmer and you know all the things, right? But as I said before, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is exclusive, because I've met some programmers who work at fairly large, like really prestigious companies, where, well, now I'm going to be honest here, these specific people were consultants as well. So hard to say if you're going to consider them to be a consultant, or if you're going to consider them to be the sort of people who went through the same processes as we did for that company. Because when they started working, we had major issues with getting them up to speed and getting them productive, and like getting them to a point where they could actually offload some of the work that we were doing, because that was the whole point, right? But had they gone through the regular screening processes, it's likely that we didn't, because we never had that onboarding problem with any of the in-house staff that we screened through, because the people that we got in, they kind of just got it immediately, and they were like just productive within a few months. We couldn't get a few of these people up to speed in a year, like to get them fully productive. And these are people who were supposed to be seniors. But that's of course just my life story. So what I want you to take away from this is that I don't really like this question, but I've tried to answer it to the best of my abilities. Usually you will find an easier time as a programmer or as a technical person in either peripheral, like the weakest people, coders are usually found in in peripheral industries where the focus is to you use code to solve the problem, but it's not your primary. You're not doing the same sort of systems development that you might expect at Google, or it doesn't have to be at the high end companies either. Like in a more serious manner, if you will. This is usually where you find people who work with some really niched tool, like extremely specific tools. Or do something extremely specific that is kind of just a sub part of what most programmers do on larger projects. And then you can find them quite often in smaller consultancies or design firms or agencies that usually have very simple projects, or projects that aren't all that like costly and massive, if you will. And then it's also fairly common that you find them in government work or other industries where the craze around being a super programmer isn't as insane as it is in the mainstream IT companies. Have a great day.